So, Biochematics has made another few responses to me, um, and first I'd like to say that it's not that I don't want to engage in a structured debate. Um, I did post a lot of comments below your video series on phenomenology. Um, I didn't get any response back. It's obviously it's a difficult um, thing to get into. But a great way to do it is to read the same paper together and then give some sort of commentary on it. Um, but the only reason I didn't engage you further with that is because I didn't really get a response from the comments I left. Which it was probably all told about 35 or 4,000, 3,500 or 4,000 words at the end of the day. So that's writing for me is what it means to be structured, I guess. When I make videos and talk, I don't like to read notes or an outline or something. I just kind of go on a journey. I walk into the woods, not knowing exactly where the path is, but just sort of to get lost. Not really lost. Hopefully, I'm saying something coherent in at least a few of my videos, but to just sort of wander around and see what turns up. If I'm going to be structured, I have to write. So that's what I did. So we can certainly jump back into phenomenology maybe by sharing a few private messages that we could then read if everyone else wanted to hear what we were exchanging. But that's just my explanation for seemingly, as you were implying, not replying to your attempt to really get into the specifics of what my position is. But putting that aside and responding to what you were bringing up, biochematics, in your last two videos, and in response to some of the comments we were exchanging, you talked a lot about fate and destiny, and the idea that you as a physical body are a physical body within a physical universe, are basically determined by the playing out of the laws and forces that are built into the physical mechanisms that make you up. And you don't see how we can get around this idea that basically what happens to us is what happens to us, and that's as simple as it is. That basically you don't think we have any free will whatsoever. And you point to a very Darwinian interpretation of evolution to show how, well, over time, what works gets selected for. So that's what's best. And that implies that, even in the cultural sphere, it's not that you can never value something knowing that it was true. Whether or not it's actually valuable will be determined by which culture survives. So in other words, one thing that I would then be led to assume based on that interpretation of how culture should operate, it seems that would mean the culture which is capable of colonizing the other cultures, taking them over, basically instituting some form of feudalism or slavery at the end of the day, upon all other cultures, such that their culture benefited and so survived. That would then become the best culture. This is social Darwinism. And I don't think that we can, I don't think that we can do that. I don't think that we can understand or describe culture in a Darwinian fashion, because culture is not mechanical. If culture, can be called culture at all, it's because it's in some way spiritual. It's a freedom of sorts, an ability to innovate, to invent that an organism gains because it is no longer strictly determined by the habits inherited from its past. And I don't think that just humans are free. I think that nature itself, what you would call the physical universe, already possesses a certain amount of intrinsic novelty. It contains possibilities which can be actualized. So the universe isn't just physical, in my opinion. It's also an idea, and it's composed of ideas. Ideas are determinate possibilities. They're particular events which may occur in the future that we are drawn to actualize. And even hydrogen is drawn to actualize a certain ideal, even if that ideal is only to coalesce with other hydrogen atoms. We call this the law of gravity, as if it were something separate from space, time, matter, and energy. It's not as though gravity is this force, that's controlling the hydrogen atom. It's the hydrogen atoms in their communion with one another produce this sort of behavior of coming together that we call gravity. Gravity is a description of what hydrogen atoms like to do. And I don't think you can really give a better definition of it. You can offer all sorts of mathematical equations which will measure it, but that's not an explanation of it in any sense. It doesn't explain its causal status. We have to say that the hydrogen wants to come together, that it has an attraction for itself. And so it's a sort of, you could say it's a very habitual attraction, so it's not that free, but the freedom is constituted by the fact that hydrogen coming together is creative. And so it's, this habitual behavior that we call gravity, all matter is attracted to itself. It's really the result of a sort of freedom, which is the ability to actualize a new form. Hydrogen likes itself, and so stars are born. And so this very habitual, we would call it a physical law, as if it were, fixed, determined forever, when really the universe is a process. All of the major forces, the strong and weak nuclear forces, gravity and electromagnetism, were originally part of one force that we can't really understand because our equations break down that soon before the Big Bang, or soon after the Big Bang. Which again, even talking about before and after the Big Bang is nonsense, because this universe itself constitutes space-time. There's no time before it or after it. There's no space outside of it. And that is a strange situation to be in. But the universe is not a determined machine. Its laws are not fixed, and its parts are non-reducible, which means that my body can't be reduced to its organs, because the only way of understanding the organs is to see them as part of a larger system, a larger whole, because their function, their anatomy and physiology is a product of their desire to self-organize my body at a larger level of reality, a larger ontology. My body has a more intense, more holistic organization than my organs as separate things. What is a heart going to do all by itself without the rest of the circulatory system in the body and the nervous system? The heart is for pumping blood, but it's also for being alive as a whole creature. So the whole creature has its own purpose, its own autonomy, that you can't find in the organs alone. And, we can go down another level to the cells. Each of my cells has its own sort of autonomy, but my body as a whole is more autonomous than any cell in particular. So this is true even of atoms. My body is composed of atoms, but I can't understand it in terms of atoms, because cells have more autonomy than atoms. The organs that the cells compose have more autonomy than those cells, and the bodies that the organs compose have more autonomy than those organs. And if you're going to understand reality, even just practically speaking, not necessarily theoretically or metaphysically, you're going to have to deal with this constant emergence of systems at higher levels of organization. Reality is a series of nested hierarchies, an infinite series for all intents and purposes. So we can't understand anything in a reductionistic way or in a deterministic way, or at least that's the universe that I presuppose. Those are my metaphysical presuppositions. Because why do I presuppose them? Because I experience the world in that way. And sometimes when we are scientistic rather than just scientific. I'm scientific. I appreciate the scientific method, but I'm not scientistic. I'm not a believer in the religion of scientism, because I think there are aspects of our experience, modes of experience, that cannot be captured or understood based on empirical measurement of the sensory world. Because for one thing, we have all sorts of internal experiences that I think are just as valid as our experiences of the sensory world that we can quantify in some way. But that's just it, you can't quantify them. So science, the scientific method, is a crucial component of a complete or holistic human life, I would say. But it's not sufficient for human life, because we need an artistic sense. We need a spiritual sense. We need a moral sense, an ethical sense, a cultural sense, a poetic sense. We need an imagination, intuition. We need empathy. We need, a kinesthetic sort of bodily knowing of the world that we can never, scientifically objectify or define or quantitatively, mathematically describe. Just because we can't mathematically describe it doesn't mean it isn't valid. Doesn't mean it doesn't possess some sort of truth value to it. And at the end of the day, it's really about not separating subject from object, distinguishing between the two, but not separating them. There is no such thing as the purely objective universe. Not even physics, the most reductionistic, deterministic, mathematical of the sciences, tells us what the objective world is. It tells us what we can measure about it. Physics is the study of mathematical abstraction as much as it is the study of reality. We build these very sophisticated measuring devices, and in so doing, we bring forth what we would call a physical reality that appears. We're twisting nature's arm, getting it to perform the dance that we choreographed for it from the beginning based on our equations. So physical observation of reality is a form of creation of reality as well. And so subject and object are indistinguishable. That's what quantum physics has shown us. It doesn't show us that, consciousness creates, consciousness collapses the wave function every time I turn around. And, only then does the real world exist. No, the real world exists for itself, because all of it has a presence to itself. Subjectivity permeates the whole universe. So human beings aren't the only observers. Everything observes itself, and so the wave function is already collapsed. Because once we separate subject from object, we get into all these sorts of contradictions and insanities, really. And, it's not that we don't have a destiny. When I say that life has a purpose, that's basically what I'm saying. There's something we are destined for. But just because we are destined for something doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to happen. We have to participate in the destiny. We have to be aware of our calling. We have to realize, our own inner desires for them to manifest, for them to become our destiny. The destiny calls us, but we don't necessarily have to answer that call. There are other possibilities for us. Nothing is inevitable. So, hopefully that makes more sense. Because I don't think at the end of the day that we disagree that much. I think really you're frightened by something that I'm doing because I don't know, maybe you're worried it could turn into some kind of cultish belief system that has no basis in empirical, measurable reality, and so you can never prove any of it. I think that's really where you are uncomfortable with what I have to say. And, I don't disagree that nothing that I say can be proved empirically. I think it requires, you have to assume scientism in order to think that every cultural exchange between human beings or intellectual discussion between human beings must necessarily be reducible to empirical proofs. In other words, nothing I say has any meaning unless I can point to its truth in the physical world, unless it has some empirical referent. I think that's absurd. We can talk about beauty and understand each other, even though there's no way to measure the objective truth of any of the shared understandings or ideas that we come up with. It's not a limit to those ideas either. It's not that then everything that can't be empirically measured is merely subjective. Because, as I said, even empirical measurement is also involved with subjectivity in a very important sense. I mean, a scientist can't see anything but through their eyes. And so the objective world is always experienced. It's perceived. We only know what we can perceive of it. Observation tells us really more about the structure of our own eyes and nervous system than it does about some supposed independent physical world. And that's the shocking thing. Doesn't mean the physical world doesn't exist. There's obviously something around me. My golden retriever, Tyler, isn't in my mind. I can't reduce other beings and the being itself of the rest of the world to my own subjectivity. I'm not trying to do that. It's all implicated in the same process of subjectivity, though. We are all conscious together, all experiencing together. We human beings, the matter composing ourselves and the world around us. It's a communion of various types and levels of subjectivity. And so, we all together decide what comes next. And that means taking ethics and philosophy, the search for truth, capital T truth, eternity, the search for some spiritual essence. These things are important, even though we can't empirically prove anything about any of it. I think we could say we can. There's a certain experiential proof, not empirical, but the sense of feeling at home in the world based on some way of conceiving of it, way of being in it. Um, that's um, that's what we're looking for. But I've gone on for a long time, so I guess I'll stop there, and let me know if this scares you more or clears up anything. Um, but yeah, let's keep the dialogue going, and we'll see where it goes.